Hi friends, I'm Nico. Welcome to Nico's house, and today I want to talk about Infinite Jest. And if you're watching this, I assume it's because you have some sort of general interest in reading Infinite Jest, but you got qualms. And of course you do. Like, that is fair. This is a hefty book, so it gave me pause, right? This is a lot to commit to. But also maybe just someone you hate loves this book. That's par for the course. Or maybe you've started it and just like give it up halfway through. What I wanted to do is go over why I think you should read Infinite Jest, and then I'll sort of do a little loop-de-loop around back to some really valid reasons why maybe you shouldn't read Infinite Jest. And then I'm going to end with how to read Infinite Jest. But to start with, why, right? Why read this book? Genuinely nothing bad will happen to you if you do not read Infinite Jest. However, I love it. I think it's a great book. And I think that the only reason that will actually get you through to the end of this book is that you want to. And that sounds obvious, but I think a lot of people start Infinite Jest for reasons other than I want to. And those reasons are not going to carry you through, because if you're reading it out of spite, if you're reading it just because it seems like a challenge or something that readers do, I just don't think it's going to happen for you. But the good news there is I do think it's a pretty easy book to want to read if you like take off like all of the like everything that's in the air around Infinite Jest, all the like online discourse, all the way, if you take all that away, the actual book I think is very easy to want to read because it's engaging and it's fun and, dare I say, beautiful. So the most compelling reason for me of why I wanted to read it was that it was really earnest, and I assumed before reading it that it was going to be completely a satire. And I think a lot of that comes from it being compared a lot of times to like Thomas Pynchon. And I've read Crying of Lot 49, and I thought the writing was really nice, but I didn't particularly care for the story. Just it being just a complete satire, that it's all, drenched in irony. And that's also great, but I think that this length, I don't think that you could make a satire that's compelling that's this long. And I think the only thing that could get me through this amount of a book is that it's earnest, that it's a good faith attempt to better understand the world and better understand people. And I think that at its core, that's what this book is, that it does absolutely have some quirky characters and some, pretentious writing structures. But like, this novel is about addiction and struggling to want to live and finding meaning in recovery and generational trauma and climate change and fear of the political landscape and consumerism, clinical depression, and like tennis, among many other things. All of those things, of course, are in the strappings of a very pretentious novel, right? But all of those things are there. This book is so earnest, like East of Eden Steinbeck earnest. And I wanted to share just like a few passages of the book. So if that pitch sells you at all, let's see if you like the writing style. So the first passage that I wanted to read from is from page 77, if you have this edition, which this is the 20th anniversary edition, and I do think you should get this one. Not for any other reason than aesthetics. I just think this is a much nicer cover than the other one. It's like blue and has clouds. I think just this one's cuter. Anyway, page 77, and it's about a character called Kate Gompert. And trigger warning for this passage, as well as the book as a whole, depression and suicidal ideation. So this is Kate, and she's in a psychiatric hospital, and she's talking to her doctor about just trying to explain how she feels, as well as how her dependence on marijuana sort of plays into her feelings. And so, but then I quit. And a couple weeks after, I've smoked a lot and finally stopped and quit and gone back to really living. After a couple weeks, this feeling always starts creeping in. Just creeping in a little at the edges at first. Like first thing in the morning when I get up, or waiting for the tea to go home after work for supper. And I try to deny it, the feeling, ignore it, because I fear it more than I fear anything. And then, but no matter what I do, it gets worse and worse. And there's more and more. This filter drops down. And the feeling makes the fear of the feeling way worse. And after a couple of weeks, it's there all the time, the feeling. And I'm totally inside it. I'm in it and everything has to pass through it to get in. And I don't want to smoke, and I don't want to work, or go out, or read, or watch television, or go out, or stay in, or either do anything or not do anything. I don't want anything except for the feeling to go away, but it doesn't. Part of the feeling is like being willing to do anything to make it go away. Understand that? Anything. Do you understand? It's not wanting to hurt myself. It's wanting to not hurt. And then the other passage that I wanted to read is from page 168. And it is a tonal shift. It's about a completely different character. So it's about it's a father that's speaking to his son, Jim. And he's talking about sort of the moment that his tennis career was over, that he had an injury that ended his tennis career. Talent is its own expectation, Jim. You either live up to it or it waves a hanky, receding forever. Use it or lose it. I'm just afraid of having a tombstone that says, "Here lies a promising old man." It's potential maybe worse than having none, Jim. Than no talent to further in the first place. Lying around, guzzling because I haven't got the balls to. God, I'm so sorry, Jim. You don't deserve to see me like this. I'm so scared, Jim. I'm so scared of dying without ever really being seen. Can you understand? Are you enough of a big, thin, prematurely stooped, young, bespectacled man, even with your whole life still ahead of you, to understand? Can you see I was giving it all I had? That I was out there in the heat, listening, webbed with nerves, a self that touches all edges, I remember she said. I felt it in a way I fear you and your generation never could, son. It was less like falling than being shot out of something, is the way I recall it. It did not happen in slow motion. 1 minute I was at a dead and beautiful forward run for the ball. The next there were hands at my back and nothing underfoot, like a push down a stairway. A rude whip-lashing shove square in the back, and my promising body, with all its web of nerves pulsing and firing, was in full airborne flight, and came down on my knees, right on my knees with all my weight and inertia on that scabrous, hot sandpaper surface, forced into what was an exact parody of an imitation of contemplative prayer, sliding forward. The flesh and then the tissue and bone left twin tracks of brown, red, gray white, like tire tracks of bodily gore, extending from the service line to the net. I slid on my flaming knees, past the dribbling ball and toward the net that ended my slide. My racket had gone pinwheeling off, Jim, and my racketless arms out before me, sliding, Jim, in the attitude of a mortified monk in total prayer. It was given me to hear my father pronounce my bodily existence as not even potentially great. At the moment, I ruined my knees forever, Jim. Of course, that was a tongue twister, so my apologies for sort of slipping up on some of those words. But that's sort of the writing style. And a lot of that can be difficult to parse, but I also think that, like, that example of a sort of unhinged father trying to explain poorly that, like, this is the thing that, like, has affected him his whole life. It's the measuring stick that he's measured himself against his entire life is this failed moment in tennis that his dad saw, and his dad's pronounced him as not great right when he ruined his knees, and that has been the thing that's shaped every moment since. I think that is absolutely the kind of thing that I want to read about, because that's people. And it's in the trappings of pretension, of whatever. The passage that I read, I don't know if I'll be able to show it very well on the camera, but there are no breaks. So it's just like no paragraphs. It's just straight text, because it's like, or from my interpretation of that is that it's someone in sort of a like, they're not like stopping, right? They're just like barreling forward in this diatribe, right? And that is clunky to read, but feels like true to life in a way. So if you like those two passages, if those pique your interest, I do think that you should give it a go. But before I like come off entirely like there's no reason why someone shouldn't read Infinite Jest, like that's just not true. So I want to also touch on really valid critiques of Infinite Jest. And I know that I gave a content warning for that first passage I read of depression, suicidal ideation. That, of course, stands for the entire book, but I wrote this down so I wouldn't miss anything, give a rundown of content warnings that I think someone should know before reading Infinite Jest. So, Infinite Jest includes references to or descriptions of attempted suicide, self-harm, addiction to drug and alcohol, racism, pedophilia, incest, domestic violence, and general violence. Some of those things that I mentioned, I think are handled beautifully. The depictions of people suffering with depression and struggling with wanting to take one's own life, like those depictions are done with a lot of care. And the depictions of part of the book takes place in a halfway house, a drug recovery halfway house, and that I think is handled beautifully. Some of the other things are not handled well, and I'm not giving him a pass on that. That just is the truth, that the way that he handles his characters that are people of color, it's not great. The way he handles his characters that are women, also not great. Also him as a person, there's a lot there that's not great. He was someone that really struggled with mental health, and I mean, that was what he died of. And he wasn't the only one that was affected by that there were people in his life that were deeply hurt by him, and he does have a history of domestic violence, and that's not something to me that can be brushed aside. However, personally, I'm okay with separating the art from the artist in certain cases, and with this, he's not a living artist. I'm not buying Infinite Jest and it supports him. It would be a more complicated question for me if that were the case, but for me, I feel fine engaging with his writing despite those things. If for you, it doesn't feel good, or any of the content warnings that I described, if those things would put you in a worse headspace, just like, don't read it. Like, honestly, as I mentioned, nothing bad will happen to you if you don't read Infinite Jest. So if this is not going to be something that adds value to your life, don't engage. And I think that's totally fine. Like, anyone that is like, oh, I really do not want to read Infinite Jest. Absolutely. It is not for everyone. I think that there's some good things in it. I think that there's some beautiful writing, some beautiful character studies, but that's not worth putting yourself in a worse headspace, right? So that's the anti-pitch of Infinite Jest. I personally love the book, but totally not for everyone. But I want to move into, all that being said, you're still wanting to read it, I wanted to give an overview of how to read it, because it is a little bit of a fiddly book to read. to start with, my number one recommendation is that I think you have to take like a Taoist approach to it. You enter the river of this story and just let it take you where it will. Don't be stressed out about understanding the plot the entire book. It's the way it is written, you will be confused. Some people read the book with a, notepad and paper out, and they're, writing copious notes about everything that happens and trying to keep the timeline right. I don't recommend that. If that's the way you want to read it, absolutely. If that to you adds to your enjoyment of the book, 100%. But if that does not add to your enjoyment of the book, don't bother. Because I just don't think it's necessary. The timeline is very non-linear at the beginning of the book. Just engage with whatever characters are in each chapter. And what I will say is towards the end of the book, things do get more linear. I found the story difficult to follow if I was actually trying to pinpoint where in the timeline is this happening, whatever, for the first half of the book. But I still enjoyed the first half of the book. And I think that that's very possible for anyone that's reading it, to just enjoy the first half, but don't stress. Don't stress that you don't know what's happening. Just engage with where you're at. And then at the end of the book, I did find that even though I hadn't written down important events or took notes on who characters are or what the timeline is, any of that, I found that it sort of comes together in a way that's makes sense. Though I will say, if you're someone who reads a book and needs all the loose threads to be tied up nicely at the end, this one's not for you. Footnotes. You have to read them. So let me pull up how much of this book is footnotes. Okay. Here's the beginning of the footnotes. So this amount of the book is footnotes. And it may feel like when you're reading it that it's obnoxious to stop the page you're on, go find the place in the footnotes. It is obnoxious. You do have to do it. A lot of the story is in the footnotes. And if you have a physical copy, just have two bookmarks. A bookmark of where you're reading in the story and a bookmark of where you're at in the footnotes. Yeah, you do just have to read them. And in terms of how you're reading it, this will make the Infinite Jest purist lip bros angry, but I love to do that. Audiobook is fine. Some people are so stressed out about this, they feel like it is cheating or not. You actually haven't even read it if you've only listened to the audiobook. And that's garbage. I have both listened to it. The first time I read it was via audiobook, and I've reread it, physical book. Both are fine. Both are perfectly fine. And I would actually recommend audiobook for a first-time reader, because so much of this book is written not with words that are conversational. A lot of the words in here are $5 words, $5 words of, big vocab words. Or sometimes they're just made up. But the way that it's structured is not standard grammar for writing. It's written in grammar of spoken English for a lot of it. And it makes so much more sense to have it read to you. And I will say the narrator, at least the one that's on Audible, does a phenomenal job. His performance, it's a 50 or something hour audiobook. It's amazing. So good. Back to footnotes. If you listen to the audiobook, I think there is a PDF that comes with it that you can find the footnotes in, but there's no audio recording of the footnotes. So it's going to be frustrating. What I did the first time that I read it was just listened to the audiobook, and then at the end of whatever I listened to, I went back and read the footnotes, and all of the purists are screaming somewhere because that's not right. You have to read them in real time. I don't know. I still read the book and enjoyed it and loved it, and I think that's what matters. all that being said is you probably, if you go the route of audiobook, probably will also need to have the physical copy. And that's obnoxious. Like, I know that's obnoxious. But you could probably get both from the library, the physical copy and the audiobook. So you don't necessarily have to spend a bunch of money on it. Footnotes. Timeline. Oh, this was the other thing. Sorry, I wrote notes of things that I wanted to make sure to mention about how to read the book. You will not 100% understand everything that happens in this book, and that you kind of just have to be okay with that. I wouldn't worry too much about like not spoiling things. Personally, I don't view this as like a plot book as much as I view it as a character book. So I enjoyed it far more reading it the second time and already knowing basically the plot point, so then I could just focus on characters. So if you want to read like guides that like tell you what happens, go for it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I also like don't really believe in spoilers. Like I just think that most things I enjoy more the second time, so I don't really care if I know what happens going into them, you know? For some people that's blasphemy. Whatever way you want to do it is fine though. And then the only one bit of like you have to do it advice is when you finish the book, when you finish the last chapter of the book, you have to read the first chapter immediately after. That's the structure of the book. I'm sorry, it's fiddly. Why is it the first chapter? I do not know. That we will never have an answer for, but that just is the way you have to do it. But yeah, I think you're ready. I think you're ready to hop in there. If you're wanting to read Infinite Jest, you're there, you know? But let me know if it would be wanted or helpful for me to go over some other books. I was thinking of maybe kind of breaking down Anna Karenina in a similar way. But let me know if you have any questions about Infinite Jest. Would love to chat with you in the comments. Yeah, hope you have a great day. Bye.